firearms.
Welcome to Sunday Service, giving our service members a platform to share their stories and experiences abroad.
Hey everyone, welcome to Sunday Service. This is our second installment, and we got an exciting one for you. If you didn't join us previously, I highly recommend you go check out our first episode. And our guest today is going to be introduced by my co-host, Josh. Josh, who do we have here with us today?
Hey, what's going on, guys? So we got Chris Vukin. Chris is a law enforcement officer out of the United States of America. I'll let him get into his department, his testimony. But Chris goes, in our family and our company go way back. I forget, how many years, but it's the department itself. What's that?
2012.
2012.
Right.
So Chris has been running with some batting dogs, and specifically, this testimony is about a law enforcement canine blade in an incident that happened while on duty with Chris a couple years ago, which went public and actually pretty much went viral, that story. So yeah, anyways, Chris, why don't you just introduce yourself, man? Give everybody a background on who you are.
My name is Christopher Vukin. I'm a deputy commander on the Lake County Sheriff's Department and the Lake County Drug Task Force. I specifically work with the high crimes unit. More so, I'll do operations with undercovers and the undercover narc guys, but mainly most of my career I've worked. The gang unit falls underneath the Lake County Drug Task Force, so probably 12 out of my 16 years I've worked in that capacity. But right now I'm second in command for the Lake County Drug Task Force. Spend a lot of time on the street with the high crime guys. I started in the jail in 2001, where I worked as a correctional officer, and in 2004 I got hired on to the police side. I spent just a few years in patrol. Probably 1 year after I got hired is when I started with Canine, where I got my first dog. Didn't have a lot of success with that first dog. I was ready to quit the Canine unit until they asked me to do it again. But they told me, and I told them I would do it under one condition. I had seen a guy, an officer by the name of Scott Bach. Hopefully he'll watch this, but he's a patrol commander now. Josh and Mike sold him Canine Gunner. And while I was failing with my first dog, Scott was tracking down one guy after another with Gunner. So I looked at that dog and I just looked at myself and I said, what am I doing wrong? And because he's doing something right. And that's, so I told him under one condition. I witnessed that dog work. They asked me to come to the gang unit and work a dog. I said, I'll do it as long as I can get a dog from Baden Canine. I always say Baden, it's Baden Canine. And I wanted a German Shepherd's dog. I didn't want to. Scott was working a Dutch. I wanted a German because I've seen some Germans track in the past, and I just like the way how methodically they move. And it just, looking back now, I don't think really the breed matters. It's just a personal preference. So they agreed to it. They sent me to Canada, and I was on the phone with Josh. I'd never met him before, but I told him I wanted two things. I want a dog that's going to track, and I want a dog that's going to bite. And he said, okay, I'll have one ready for you. So went up there, and he showed me how the dog tracked, and I'm watching this dog track through that park, whatever park that was we went through. He's tracking through other people, tracking through horses that are walking by. And that's where I started with my second dog, Blade, which I worked for till he was shot in the face in 2017. That was about 5 years. And now I'm working Canine Twist.
Outstanding. Chris, talk a little bit about, I know we're really heavy on the canine piece, but you also operate as a sniper with your unit.
Yeah, I've been
talk a little bit about that.
I've been a sniper on the SWAT team for about 10 years, and it's not don't get me wrong. When I say sniper, it's sniper observer, and we're not operating like somebody like Kevin would operate. I'm not out there like sniping terrorists or anything. When we get called out to things like barricaded gunmen, I'm behind a rifle, but I'm also observing through the windows, and we're learning how to creep up close and not be seen, but we're still able to look and see into the house and to relay that information into the command center. So a lot of it is, and I have been on call outs where our snipers did have to take somebody out, but personally, that's not something I've ever had to do. Hopefully I never will. But and then the sniper, as far as drug raids go, we're out doing surveillance before the raid actually happens. And then in the canine aspect, Blade was a part of our SWAT team, and Blade was sent through some houses on barricaded gunmen, and he did take one down. It was pretty cool. Operated with the team. The team was clearing the house. The dog operated right through him, went down a staircase and hammered the guy underneath the staircase. And well, there was another one before that didn't involve the SWAT team that I sent him in on. He got that guy too. When I entered the house, he was dragging the guy across the kitchen floor, which was pretty awesome. So as far as tactical goes, I am part of our narcotics team has what we call a TNT, tactical narcotics team, where we don't use the whole SWAT team, where I will switch to the entry role, and I'll do entries with those guys too. We have pretty specific roles on our SWAT team, and the entry guys take pride in what they do. I take pride in what I do. But I'm kind of like a universe, I've been training just about everything. So that's pretty much it. I mean, that's pretty much my career as it stands now. In Lake County, Indiana, which if you're familiar with it, the city of Gary is inside of Lake County. The city of Gary was pretty much the murder capital of the United States for a lot of years in the late 90s, early 2000s, but it's still, it's a fairly poor city, kind of like a small version of Detroit. But the murder rate is very high. There's a lot of gang activity, a lot of drug dealing. And I've been on a unit since I've been doing this for 15 years. So I've actually been on a gang unit for about 12 of that 15 years. They've changed the name of it a few times. It's been gang unit. Now it's the high crimes unit, but depending on what sheriff has been in. But the majority of my career has pretty much been working with a gang unit. Like I said, I'm 42 years old now. I'm a deputy commander now. I moved up in rank, so I have a lot more administrative duties to do now, but I'm one of those guys who you're never going to pull off the street until I can't move anymore. So that's me.
Well, Chris, it takes a special person, one, to be in law enforcement, and it takes an extra particular type of person to get into doing some of the SWAT team work that you're doing, the K9, and to kind of go and wear all hats, or be able to wear all hats and learn a lot of different things. Where did that come from? Talk a little bit about where were you born and raised, and like a little bit about your life.
Yeah, I was born in California. My dad was a Marine, and his family was in Northwest Indiana. My mom's side of the family is from the East Coast, from Philadelphia. But after my dad got out of the Marine Corps, he was a Vietnam veteran. He got out of the Marines and became a paramedic. So he's been in, public safety his whole life too. And we moved back to Northwest Indiana, but I grew up a very modest lifestyle. We didn't have much money. Grew up in Maryville, Indiana, in a small house with 2 sisters and a brother. My parents still live in that same house. But I always had a lot of respect for the police. My dad always had a lot of respect for the police and people in uniform. And as I was growing up and got into high school, I just decided that's what I wanted to do. I had a lot of respect for them. So, and I always liked, my dad got me into martial art. I was in judo when I was 3rd grade, and I got into karate, and then I got into before any of these young guys who think they all know MMA, you know, they're all MMA experts. I was kickboxing in the late 90s, and I got into full contact kickboxing through about the early 2000s. I was doing it then, so I always kind of tried to gear my activities, and I also got a degree in criminal justice from Indiana University Northwest. I got a 4-year degree, so everything I basically did with my life, I was trying to gear towards law enforcement. So, and then as far as the canine thing went, my first FTO, Scott Bach, my first field training officer was a canine officer, and I just right away knew, you know, I've always liked dogs. I liked what he was doing, and it got me interested in it. And I just said, yeah, I want a dog as soon as I can get one.
So for those of you joining us who also were here for episode 1, you'll notice that we have our friend Kevin Whitenet, also known as Yoda. And I mean, we enjoyed Yoda so much, and he was able to tag along again for this episode. So Kev, thanks for joining us again. It looks like you're going to be a regular co-host with us here when your schedule allows for it. I know you're doing some contracting, but I just wanted to point that out. Welcome as well, Kevin. Do you have any questions here for Chris?
I got some questions for Chris, but I'm going to wait till we get to the right places in his story. And I'm really stoked. I can't wait to hear your stories, Chris, because like guys like you, like you guys are truly on the cutting edge, the leading point end of looking after us all. And you know, if I have heard people say different things about the police becoming more military-like and all that over the past number of years, and there's some truth to that, but there's a necessity of it. And like you guys are basically in combative environments almost like every day.
Yeah, it's true. It's people don't really realize how many guns and shootings that we run into, you know. So
yeah, and you guys see. The truth is the emergency services like law enforcement, firefighters, paramedics, on a day-to-day business, if you count that over a whole career, you guys see a lot more trauma than guys like myself do. I mean, guys like me, we see trauma, don't get me wrong, we see it, but it's not like every single day we're running into all this foolishness and people with serious problems, people lying to us every day, and literally people's bodies in like horrible states. I know you guys go into buildings on warrants, and you guys have shared stories with me that some of the living conditions and the conditions of people's health is just horrendous. So like we, you know, from the soft community, I just want to say thank you for what you guys do, and quoting the term, thank you for your service. We appreciate that.
I appreciate it, Kevin. We appreciate what you do too. Believe me, it's admired.
Our job's easy.
Hey, Chris, why don't you?
I highly doubt that.
Chris, why don't you get into, Corey, if I can, you know, the day of, I guess, get right to the day of, you know, the situation that you and Blade came up against. As much detail as you want to provide.
You know, it's been public. The investigation is over. You know, we always worry about the department as a whole worries about lawsuits and things, but I'm pretty sure, you know, it's been enough time now. It's already been in the papers as to what happened, so I really don't have any trouble talking about it. But you know, being on a gang unit or a high crime unit, people think sometimes that traffic stops, that all they're for is for speeding tickets and traffic violations, and that's really not the case. Criminals use the law to I guess you could say get out of they use the law and the Constitution to help them get out of crimes. Well, we use it to our advantage too. So if I can stop a gang member on a traffic stop and find, you know, maybe he's driving without a license. Well, now that rolls into, he can now be arrested for driving without a license. I get into the car. I find that this guy is a convicted felon and he's carrying a pistol under the seat. And he's got a few ounces of cocaine in the car. So traffic stops lead to a lot more, I guess, higher level crimes, higher level felonies. I've gotten very high level felonies just based off of traffic stops. So a lot of what our unit does is we go into the high crime areas and we basically make a lot of traffic stops. So that's basically what we were doing that particular day. So that particular day we were working a day shift. It was 8 to 4. And I'll sometimes being the supervisor that day, I'll look at the screen and I'll look at our computer screen and look and see where the most activity is at, and I'll send our unit into that neighborhood that seems to be getting a lot of, calls for the day or a lot of shooting for the day. There's a lot of shots fired calls, and sometimes I'll direct it based on that. So we went into a neighborhood called Glen Park. That day I was in a fully marked police car, and there's a spot that I like to hide. It's by a stop sign. And I'm basically just making traffic stops on people running stop signs. So what we have is a car that basically blew through the stop sign. So I threw it in drive. The car speeds up, goes south on Georgia Street, hangs a right on 43rd Avenue, a real fast right. I knew they were trying to dip out on me. And then it just all of a sudden comes to a stop and rolls to the side, and somebody bails out of the car. So I've got Blade in the back of the car. We have door poppers. I usually, when somebody bails out and runs on me, I like to have Blade come out the cage with me and out my door. Sometimes it doesn't always work out that way because the cage would be, I just couldn't get it open fast enough. Well, that day, a subject bails out of the car. I wasn't able to get Blade out the center, but I have a button on my vest that I can pop. So I'm chasing this guy through an alley, and I hit the button, and Blade comes shooting past my right side, and that's like the best feeling ever. I don't know, Kevin, if you have experience with that kind of thing, but the best feeling in the world is when your dog comes shooting by your side like a missile and honing in on this. Like, I can't even explain how awesome it is. But so he's going at this guy like a missile, and right as I yelled, take Blade, take, this guy turns in the blink of an eye. I mean, it's so fast, and people don't understand how fast somebody can turn from they're facing the other direction. Turns, I hear a pop, see a muzzle flash, and I hear my dog yelp. And it took me a second. It really took me it seemed like an hour thinking back on it, but maybe a fraction of a second to process what happened. So I sidestep a little bit into some brush, and my dog kind of runs a circle and starts trotting back to me. And I mean, at that point I knew he was shot. So, I'm screaming at this guy, you better drop the gun. I can see he still got the gun in his hand. And as he turns towards me, that he made a movement with his shoulder towards me with the gun in his hand. And that's when I returned fire. So, and I'm not telling this story to brag about it. I think it's really what I've always just wanted people to know is how important it is and how important these dogs can be as far as protecting us, because I've no doubt in my mind that guy would have fired on me and not my dog. So the suspect went down. Blade literally spun in a circle, and when he saw that I was still going after this guy, the dog turned and re-engaged with a bullet. And mind you, I didn't know this where he was hit at the time, but the dog had a bullet in his jaw. It went through the top of his nose and into his jaw. The dog re-engages, and I gave him a verbal call out because I could see that the suspect was incapacitated, and he came trotting back to me, and I could see the blood kind of flowing out of his mouth. That's when my partner started to show up and took control of the suspect, and Blade came trotting to me. It's kind of amazing because, I had a guy roll up. Blade ran to me. I scooped him up, threw him in the back seat of a squad car, and he just sat there. Blade, here, come here. Sit up. He doesn't want to sit up. But he just kind of sat there, turned and looked and just stared at me with blood flowing out of it. I didn't even know what to do, you know. I don't know, you know, his jaw was halfway hanging off. I didn't know how to stop the blood. I thought for sure he was dead. He was going to die. He was bleeding so bad. So I'm covered in blood. The whole back of the car is covered in blood. And we're just on the radio trying to get a vet to accept us. We rolled into one vet's office, and they literally, and I had my dog bleeding, covered in blood, and they literally basically told us to get lost. We don't do this kind of thing. So I had some choice words for him at the time because I really didn't care. But we got out of there, and a fireman, which I thankfully was able to find another vet close by and radioed us in, and they helped stop the bleeding, and they gave him some shot of something to help him out. And that's, after that, we went from there, we went to Purdue University, which is about a 70-mile drive south. And, you know, I never heard a peep out of the dog. He just sat there in the back, and I was in the passenger seat. Scott Bach, Josh, you know Scott. I don't know if I think you've met him, Kevin.
Yeah.
And I didn't hear a peep out of him, man. He just sat back there like, and, you know, I got him out of the car. By the time we got to the hospital, there was already like 6 or 7 reporters standing there with cameras and everything. And the dog literally came out of the car and just did what he did. Like he was ready to hammer one of the reporters.
Fake news.
So, you know, Purdue was pretty awesome. A vet came in, they shot him up with some fentanyl. By then he was out of it. They reached in his mouth, they pulled out a fraction. She was able to reach down like into his neck pouch area, skin, and pull out a nice chunk of bullet, which the state police were able to analyze and match it to the suspect gun. And then it turned out with the x-rays that his jaw was broken. He had some fragments in his jaw, and a lot of his top teeth were blown out, and whatever wasn't blown out on that side of his mouth had to be removed or pulled later. But he's doing fine now. He just doesn't have any teeth, so I had to retire him and went back up to Josh and got another dog.
Chris, man, thanks for sharing that, dude. I didn't know the entire story. I only knew a small part of it. Okay, so for the viewers, there's a lot that's misunderstood. If for those people that are experienced with violence and experience with violence on a regular basis and having to apply skill sets inside a violent environment, we understand the importance of the human factor and the real importance of harnessing human emotion and doing our jobs. And which really a lot of the viewers may or may not know, and I'm just going to roll into my question for Chris, is skills are a dime a dozen. It really is. If you're reasonably athletic and you have a reasonable ability to learn, and you're teachable, you can learn most of the skills that guys like Chris have, guys like myself, guys like Josh has. Like, skills come and go, and like lots of people can learn skills. And we encourage that. Where things get hard not to speak for Chris, but for the public, where things get hard for a guy like Chris and myself or anyone in a violent environment is what we do with our emotions in the middle of that fight. And sometimes emotions don't come up in the middle of the fight. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they come up later. And then for some guys like myself, they'll come up early, like before I even get out of the helicopter. Before I get on the helicopter, I may have emotion, and then as soon as I get in the helicopter, things kind of level out for me till later. So Chris, in thinking about the human factors and emotion, my first question to you is, if we roll back to when you first realized that Blade was shot, you're already in the scrap, and the perp's right in front of you, and you realize that Blade is shot. Can you elaborate on what or if or any emotions were going through your heart right at that time?
You know, I'm glad you asked that, because I haven't thought about that for a long time, and I was forced to see a psych doctor. You know, any cop who goes through a shooting has to do it. But she asked me what I felt, and this is no lie. I had adrenaline flowing through me for sure, but as far as emotion, I don't remember feeling anything. And when I think back on it, all I remember is seeing the front sight of that pistol and seeing it like I had not a single bit of emotion at all. It was like I was on autopilot, you know? And it was afterwards, I had some emotion, you know? And now, probably thinking back on it now, I probably have more now than I had then. But during the actual process, once that car took off on me, you know, you always have like some apprehension and nervousness. If you don't have that, then there's something wrong with you. But as soon as the process started happening, it was like everything just went away. You know, as soon as I bailed out of that car, I was just operating. You know, there was no scared, there was no fear, there was no nervousness, there was just adrenaline.
Outstanding. Outstanding. So, and if I may comment on that for the public, so that's what I anticipated was going to be your answer, Chris. For the viewers, a lot of folks, they may not understand this process that Chris has just explained, that the not feeling of emotion in the middle of the fight, that some people may equate that to that guys like Chris are fearless, that they don't have fear. The truth is that's not the case. It's like, well, that's Chris's subconscious kicking in, and based on a high level of training that he's received from his department, combined with just having the right type of attributes as a human being to do the work that he does, results in effective decision making and effective action when violence stresses on them. So that having the train right and effectively, and then also, you know, be the right type of person to do that kind of work, it's critical to combine those two things. But for the viewers, like was talked about last week, and I think it's important to kind of connect things here. You'll see as we roll forward in the podcast, you're going to see, you know, similar themes going through. It's like Chris was highly prepared for that engagement, and that wasn't preparedness because of haphazard preparedness, but from the beginning of his training, he followed stepping block and stepping stones to prepare his mind and his body for that type of violent stress, which resulting in him not being inhibited by negative human emotions during the fight. Does that make sense? And and that's very similar to professional athletes. Professional athletes, anyone who's performing in high levels of stress, whether it's a deadly high levels of stress, or they're in sporting, or they're physicians, or they're pilots, and they're working in really, really high levels of stress. Well, that subconscious kicks in when the stress is on, and they're going back to their foundation, like Josh spoke about on last Sunday night, that their foundation has been set well because of training, and they have the right attributes to work in that type of environment. So thanks.
You know, that situation was the last of a lot of engagements that I had with that dog, you know, so I don't remember, but I could tell you probably the first, even not involving the dog, the first vehicle pursuit I was in or started myself, that once it starts, you know, your emotions kind of just go out the window, you know, and I want to say just about every single engagement with the dog, which is probably with Blade, I probably had about 60 or so. And, you know, that one was supposed to be just another takedown, and it proved it was a lot more. But you're right. I pretty much believe that every single time it happened, I felt the same way.
Yeah. And why do you, just from your thoughts, and Josh will be able to chime in on this too. It's pretty astounding. Like if anybody here has ever been in a fist fight, that's viewing, not that I'm not advocating fist fighting, but you know, when you get punched in the face, it can kind of stop you in your tracks, you know? But Blade didn't do that. Blade got shot in the face and pushed forward deeper into the fight. What's your feelings on why Blade did that and why Blade was able to do that?
I think his intensity, he seems to be very intensely protective of me. And I don't know, he's different than any other dog I've really ever seen. It's just that he's just, you know, right now he's literally, this is what he does all day. But when he goes on, when Blade launches a real attack, and I talk about this a lot too with people, and sometimes it pisses people off, and I really don't care. But as far as doing decoy work on a bite suit and watching a dog, you know, do all the bite and hold stuff, and they look extremely aggressive. Well, you put Blade attacks a man in a suit, and he almost looks bored when he's doing it, because it's like he's smart enough to know that he's not getting through that suit, you know. But when Blade launched a real attack on the street, he turned into something different, something that not many people got to witness. I mean, his hair would flare out. I have only a few witnesses, you know, like the people on my gang unit that got to see it. His hair would flare up. He would turn into something way, way different. And there's an aggression level there that you've just never, ever, ever seen, you know. And you know, he took that bullet, shook it off, and bam, went right back at it. It's like he just didn't care. He was literally laying into that. And you know, one of the reasons I really haven't talked about this a lot was that, you know, that somebody died here. They had a family. They had a parent. This guy had parents. He had a brother. I don't want to rub any of this in any of the, you know, I feel for them. I'm sorry for them. But the experience, other handlers and other operators, other cops, other canine guys, they need to know, you know, that they need to know, the public needs to know how good these dogs are and just how fierce they can be when they're protecting their handlers. I don't believe he would have done that if I wasn't there. You know, he probably would have took the bullet and ran away, but I was there. He was doing this for me. So, you know, I believe that's why the dog did it.
Do you mind doing us a favor, brother? Turning that camera towards Blade.
Hey, Blade, come here. Blade.
So all you viewers, this is a dog. You guys can.
I will tell you this: he doesn't like cameras. He likes to turn away from them. But
that's because you don't like cameras. That's why. Blade, what's up, dude?
Blade, look at him. He's like, nope, I'm not saying hello to him.
Yeah.
Like, get me out.
It's fake news, man. I don't like cameras.
But
that's Blade. That's the dog. That's the canine that was beside Chris that day. He took one round, right, Chris? Right in the mouth.
Yeah, one 9mm hollow point, right. You can't even tell right now, but right on the side, it entered here, went down into his jaw. You can see he's got no teeth left there where the bullet went through, but everything's healed up now. He's got a couple plates in his jaw. I don't know if you can see it from what I just showed you. Yeah, he's real mellow at home, you know, like real mellow. But you get him out on the street, and the really cool thing about him was how awesomely and how good he target discriminated. From the very first day I had him, I brought him up into the office, and he almost attacked my he tried to attack my supervisor. It was pretty cool, thinking back on it. But I was able to stop him. You know, he charged my sergeant, and I was able to jump up and stop him. And he put the brakes on and trotted back to me while he was eyeballing my sergeant. So it took a couple weeks for him to get acclimated to the rest of the team. But once he did, everybody loved him. We never had to worry about him. And when you bring them out onto the street and you had, you know, let's say 5 or 6 gang members standing there, and you had 3 or 4 cops standing there, the dog Blade would come out and he would literally snake through, and he would look through, like look past and look underneath the legs of the cops that were standing there and target every single gang member. And people want to, and it's not just, it's definitely not racial. There was gang members or white, black, whatever race you can think of. He always knew what sense he was supposed to be on. And he always knew when we were out on a traffic stop who he was supposed to target. That intensity just came out. There was no barking. There was no, he would just get down into that launch position. His eyes would come wide open and he would just turn into something else. But I bring him home and this is what he does.
We talk a little bit about emotion and how there wasn't any present at the time. And it's really bizarre because hearing this story, it brings up a little bit of emotion for me, being the soft civilian in the room. But the reason why is because when we were doing the TV show and we did some training at Baden Canine, Josh and his dad would always make comments like, hey, you're putting in work here. You're putting in time with these dogs for the teams, you know, for the men in the front line. And to me, it didn't really click as a real life thing. It was like, okay, it's a dog and then the dog leaves and I don't hear any stories about it. And to know that the families such as Josh and the team at Baden put in on a day-to-day basis and then hand off dogs that do such miraculous acts like you're talking about in your situation here, Chris, to hear about Blade flying by you and basically protecting your own life. I just think about how many other dogs that, you know, I witnessed that are now in the field, are going to the field, that are going to produce stories just like Chris's. And I just really find that outstanding, and I appreciate you being able to communicate that with us, Chris. And the one question I'd have is, you talked about not having the emotion. How long had you been in the field with Blade at that point prior to this interaction and Blade being shot?
Maybe roughly 5 years, maybe a little less. That was the unfortunate thing because the dog should really still be working right now. But without teeth, I can't, you know, he can't protect himself. The dog, he can definitely still track, he can still move, but he's got no teeth. So whatever teeth weren't blown out were fragmented and had to be pulled. So, but the engagement, you know, 3 days after I brought Blade home from Canada, I was in a pursuit that I started just based off a traffic stop, and I chased this guy around in Glen Park neighborhood. You can Google Glen Park, Gary, and look it up, and you'll see probably the first thing that's going to come up is things about gangs. But so I chased this guy for about 15 minutes until well, I won't go into all the details as far as how we stopped it, but he eventually crashed into a tree, bailed out of the car. And Blade, I'm not kidding you, the dog was sleeping in the back seat the whole time because he hadn't done this yet. So I knew that I had the leash draped over my shoulder. I was ready. The entire shift, I was ready with that leash draped over my shoulder to pull him out with me. And so I didn't even put the car in park. I just rear-ended the car, bumped it a little bit. I didn't really cause any damage. Bailed out of the car. I had about 5 or 6 guys behind me, and we're chasing this guy down the alley, and they all lit this guy up behind me with their flashlights. So the dog had a target. And it was a very, very nice thing to have because my dog prior to that was a sport dog that had really bad training. I wasn't really educated in how properly before I had come to Canada. So the dog was out and he's with me, happy, real happy, just trotting by my side. And as soon as I said those words, man, he targeted what those flashlights were on. He targeted. Next thing you know, the dog takes off like a rocket. The bad guy disappears around the corner. The dog disappears. I round the corner and Blade's on top of him, basically doing a dance, just hammering him. I saw Blade crunch down on the guy's rib cage, and I'm like, okay, that's enough. Good take, you know, pulled him out. Rest of the guys jumped in and cuffed him up. And that was Blade's first one. That was 3 days. 3 days after I brought him home.
What was that
And I
feeling
feel
like, Chris?
What did it feel like?
Yeah.
There's no better feeling. I feel sorry for any cop in the world who hasn't had the opportunity to work a dog like this. I mean, a lot of guys refuse to do canine. We have trouble getting canine applicants because they think it's just so much more work, or they've got to have a cage in their car and they don't want it there. But I feel sorry for anybody who hasn't gotten to do the things that I've done in their career with this dog here. And I'm hoping to continue that with the dog that I have now. I'm getting older. I'm in a supervisory position now, so I don't get as many opportunities to be out on the street as in the capacity that I was, but I'm still doing it. And I mean, to have it 3 days after you get the dog, I didn't even do drug work with the dog. I was supposed to do drug work with the dog, but the sheriff at the time didn't care because we were tracking down and making so many apprehensions that's just what I focused on.
You were kind of doing drug work. It was just a different angle of drug work.
Yeah, right.
Hey, listen, if I can, we're getting into in the shooting community and the combative community and the training community. There's all kinds of different philosophies, and there's all kinds of. A gentleman contacted me on social media this morning and said, "Man, you guys have to have big fangs to defend yourself against these dog people." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he just gave me an example. He posted a picture of a puppy and everybody attacked him. But, in the law enforcement canine, I'm speaking from the canine, there are a ton of different styles and approaches of how you're supposed to train a dog and how you're supposed to train the officer and all that stuff. And I don't personally get into the controversial online, he said, she said, schoolboy stuff. But the style, and this isn't praise for us because Chris comes from a combative background. Kev, you can jump in there as well. But the style of training that goes into the officers, the SWAT guys, the canines from our facility is realistic, but touches on the emotional part of what we're discussing. And when you look at what happened to Chris and the dog's response, the preparation for that, not only in the training, but the breeding, the raising, the grooming, the upbringing. Corey, you mentioned it, the amount of influence you have to when you grab one of our dog's leashes, and we told you that. There's a major influence. You open your mouth, you talk to these dogs, you touch them, you pet them, you look at them. Anything you have to offer them is going to influence and affect that situation that day with Chris in the field with Blade getting shot at. His dog gets shot, and that's the reality of it. And it's not a sport. He didn't get a ribbon. He didn't go home and they didn't celebrate. And I have nothing against sport, but for us, it's real. Men and women's lives are on the line. We know that. And the dogs, the approach that we take and the training tactics come from real world stuff with real world people with real world backgrounds, whether it be law enforcement, special forces, military. We're a family with a history that we don't boast about it. And we understand, and these guys understand, and Chris brought it up, he had a sporting dog in the beginning, and there's a story behind that sporting dog. I mean, I know that story, running that first track years. And, Chris took a lot. Here's the truth, man. The funniest part about this, and it's not funny, is you have a law enforcement officer, a SWAT guy, that puts his butt on the line. He won't boast about it, but we will. And he's out there. Blade gets shot. Chris goes through what he went through. They come home both safe and alive. And he gets personally attacked by the public through a situation about how his style of training is ineffective. He shouldn't be training this way, challenged. And Chris, let me tell you something about Chris. Chris is a quiet guy, but he is not quiet when it comes to the truth. And I say that very humbly. He went online and he basically put these guys in their place which is rightly so. And here's the thing, people, and this is for the viewers. When you're listening to something, you got to really consider what it is you're listening to, especially what's going on currently. There's a lot of people with a lot of advice. And there's a lot of books out there, and there's a lot of advice out there on what to eat, what to drink, how to work out, how to dress, how to talk. And these men and women with their testimonies are walking examples of what to do and what not to do, and what works and what doesn't work. And exactly. When you are being shot at, when your dog is being deployed, when your dog comes back with a bullet in the face, and you have like real intellectual property of what to do and what not to do, and what's working and what's not working, and then you get guys in the industry and gals in the industry that come back and try to challenge techniques and styles of training, is totally amateur. And Corey, and I'm throwing that out there because this is the crap that we do. Chris knows this, Kevin knows this. We don't get involved in it, but this is the Instagram, the Facebook, the clatter that's out there. And again, I repeat myself, the advice that people want to know how not to be afraid. I talked to somebody the other day. They had an individual that in their inner circle that has fear issues right now. And I told him, I said, well, what are they saying to that person? Who's saying it? Because if somebody's going to give advice on fear, they better know what fear is. Chris took what he learned and what he saw was true and not true, and he applied it downrange. And that's, in my humble opinion, that's why he's here today to share his testimony, and that's why Blade's still alive. Well,
Josh, I think those are good points. And one thing I just want to touch on, and we touched on it last episode as well, which is, actions, not words, right? So the one thing that I find interesting here, Chris, is that you made a point that now Blade's no longer in service. So what you did is you went down to Baden to get another dog. And to me, that's an action. You're not telling people about how good Blade is alone. Solely your actions told me that that was the quality dog that you needed to get, because that's the one that you chose to be by your side. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of why was that your decision?
Well, it was just a no-brainer for me. My first dog was, I don't want to say exactly where it was from, because I don't want to bash this guy or anything. There's a lot of people that like him, and I'll just leave it at that. But the dog was, in a patrol aspect, was completely useless to me. I tried to send him on a bite one time, and of a stolen car suspect that was running from me, and the dog wouldn't bite. I needed a takedown, and the dog wouldn't take him down. So luckily there was another cop coming around the corner on the other side of the alley that tackled this guy, because I couldn't catch. He was faster than me. Tackled him, but unfortunately the dog bit the cop instead of the bad guy. So there was failure number one, And I don't know what to do about it. And then I'm realizing that these dogs are really trained to attack extreme like animation, right? So I can tell Blade to attack anything I want to. It doesn't matter if it's moving. It doesn't matter if it's laying still. It doesn't matter if it's a guy laying in a corner with a gun perfectly still. If I tell Blade to attack, he's going to. A lot of these dogs are, sport dogs are trained to only attack aggression. And sometimes the cop is the more aggressive person coming in to take a person down. So, you don't want the cop to get hammered. You want the bad guy to get hit, not the cop. Second time I tried to deploy the dog was on a domestic violence suspect. He jumped out the window on me. He had beaten this woman up severely. And I tried to deploy the dog. The dog, again, wouldn't bite. So I was probably in my late 20s then. I'm 42 now, but I was in my late 20s then. And the dog wouldn't bite him, ran a circle around him. The guy stopped, confronted me. Me being who I was back then, I just jacked him right in the face. And the dog jumped up and bit me when I hit the guy. So It was like, okay, so now my own dog bit me. So All right.
Yep.
So the dog wouldn't track because I was trained to track wrong. And I remember the first time I went to Canada, your father, Josh, Mike McConnery, I remember the one thing that came out of his mouth. I was lucky enough when I was picking up Blade that Mike was putting on his tracking course, his beginner tracking course. And I listened, and his father said, you need two things for a track. You need a starting point and you need a person at the end of the track. The dog can do everything in between. Anything that comes in between you, that dog and you is going to be a distraction. So when I realized that they were training me to track tennis balls in the grass with my first dog is when I realized that I was never trained to track people. I was trained to find tennis balls in the grass. That's why I failed for 6 years at tracking people, you know. And when I got Blade and, you know, I got my first apprehension off of a track, not a running bike, but actual track after about a week. And then subsequently after that, I was tracking person after person after person, block after block after block. Surface didn't matter. The street didn't matter. I was tracking through alleys, past dog houses, past garbage, you know, anything that would normally distract a dog, I was tracking right through it. Other cops, nothing mattered. If the person was there, I was going to find them. And if I didn't find them, it meant that they got into a house or they got into a car and got away. But I was still finding evidence along the way, like their cell phone, their clothes, you name it, I was finding it. And to have that much success with a dog, it's a no-brainer. Of course you're going to go back and get another one from the same people, you know, because that dog was, I mean, it's when you have a dog that operates with you in that way, it's like you're one person. It's like you're one entity, you know. It's not you trying to force a dog to do something. It's not you wrapping the leash around the dog's front leg so you force his head to the ground. You know, the dog is using his instincts and you're following him, and that's it. You'll watch his head do all kinds of cool things and dart into corners, and there's all kind. I could go on and on and on and on about this, but the fact of the matter is the dog operated exactly the way I needed him to operate, and that's why I went back to Canada.
Thanks for sharing that, Chris. And Josh, thanks for kickstarting that thought process. And I'd like to say a few things related to the training piece. And prior to saying it, I first want to say no way is my intent to smash any trainers out there, training philosophy or anything like that. But I just want to share some knowledge that isn't specific to my knowledge, but it's specific to all those that are both operators and trainers at high levels. So we've all heard the saying, you know, practice makes perfect, but we all know that's not true. Perfect practice makes perfect. You can practice as much as you want and train as much as you want. If your training doesn't directly apply to your operating environment in every single way, your training program is setting yourself up for failure. So at the tier 1 level, and I'm not going to speak for any other levels, I'm talking about the highest special operations level, which is the tier 1 level. Those who are teaching shooting, they're teaching gunfighting. Those men and women, they've done it. They've been out gunfighting and killing bad guys in gunfights and learned many lessons. They don't just have high levels of skill and how to shoot like a crazy madman faster than you can blink, because that's the easy part. The skills are the easy part. But understanding the true operating environment and having experience in it, and then being able to look at a student and understand what that student's going to need in that operational environment, and then still have the skill set to actually translate a skill to that student and help that student apply that skill in the same operating environment they got to go back to work at. That's a whole other level of training. And trainers need to have that. If you're deploying men, women, and dogs into violent environments, and you're training men, women, and dogs to perform in violent environments, those trainers that are doing that, they best have a lot of experience in those violent environments. And they better have the knowledge, wisdom to be able to translate skill sets to those officers and or operators, whatever we want to call them, in a manner that will be effective. So, you know, there's so many disciplines in life, and in the sporting world has cross-pollinated over into law enforcement and military, and there's parts of it that should have. There's, you know, you got IPSC shooters that are super dynamic, skilled shooters that special operators have learned from them, okay, from sport shooters. Like guys like me have learned from sport shooters. But sports shooting has, outside of learning very certain specific skills, sport shooting and gunfighting in real life, they're not related. And tracking balls on a field is not related to tracking a human being. And Chris, you said something that's a $1 million statement, dude. Like, it truly is if your dog is trained, and I'm not smashing anybody, and this doesn't just go for dogs, it goes for human beings. If your dog or your humans are trained to just go after, respond to aggression, to the most aggression on the field, well, guess what? It's going to be the officers and it's going to be the operators that are going to get bit, because they are the highest predator on the X, and they're supposed to be. The last thing we want is to send Chris and all those other police officers out on the X against human beings that are more predatorial than they are. And I use the word predator in a good way, meaning aggression, the ability to apply aggression and accomplish something. So how we train our police officers, how we train our soldiers, how we train our firefighters, our emergency services, and for civilians that are getting involved with training to learn how to look after their family, you better make sure that whoever's training you, they're qualified to train you in that environment.
Kevin made a good point with the experience, because you know, you might be able to pull that off on the civilian side of the house, but guys like this, it gets them killed. And the unfortunate thing is there's a lot of guys out there and gals running facilities, breeding dogs, teaching combatives, whether it be shooting on our side of the house as dogs, putting a price tag on them and a pedigree and a description that these dogs are street ready and ready to go. And it's unfortunate, but it praise the Lord, the first dog didn't get him killed, but it very well might have, or somebody else.
You know, you would have thought that dog was the greatest thing in the world with the way he hit a bite suit, because he'll take you to the ground. He'll hit you hard in a bite suit. But that, you know, that's the deception. It's just because the dog will jump and hit a full mouth bite on a suit doesn't translate to the street whatsoever at all.
No.
I mean, with some sport dogs are good dogs. I mean, I've seen a few, and we actually have to retrain them on some things, but some can be very deceiving, because all they want is that coat or that equipment, and you think they're going to bite on the street, but when a decoy can pet your dog on the head while he's on the bite, there's a problem. And you're going to watch these guys decoying literally pet the dog that's attacking on the head as if it's a good thing. You know, you pet my dogs on the head, I'm sorry, your hands are gone, man. Like, you're finished.
For the viewers that just, you know, are interested in the style of training or the techniques in the sporting community or other styles of philosophy. And Chris, it was a good point, because there are sporting dogs. This isn't just a whole overview on every sporting facility out there or claiming to be sporting. There are good dogs out there coming from these other facilities, but the tactics and the techniques are what they call is bite and hold. And what they'll do is they'll allow the dog to come in and make contact to the most of the time one or multiple areas of the threat, one being the arm, and they'll do a full mouth bite, and the dog will hold on, and they'll either take a whip of some sort or pet the dog or bring a device around, and they'll test the dog's ability to be able to stay on and continue to bite while they move in and around this dog with a hand, a petting technique, or Chris likes to use the terminology, it's not his, but the clacker, the clacker sticks. But here's the thing, in reality, anybody that knows anything, and me coming underneath my father's direction and having some real world experiences, is that hand on the street is a gun, a knife, and as Chris's testimony, it's a gun. And that dog cannot stay engaged and allow the bad guy to stab them. And, Google stab police dogs or shot police dogs. So we allow the dog's natural ability and with some guidance to make decisions on when and where to bite, and if arms move or feet move in a threat manner, that dog is permitted to defend itself, which is the argument. And other facilities and trainers will say, no, the dog's got to hold on, the dog's got to bite and hold and all that. And we're against it. So that's the big controversy of what Chris is talking about. So for the viewers, just to get an idea of small picture of what it is and how it is Blade works. And it's saved, and Chris can tell you this, it's saved him probably numerous times on the street, as well as you, other officers, and bottom line, our safety in the end.
Amazingly, these dogs that they say are typewritering on the suit because they're just trying to find a weak spot on the suit and get through it. But they'll still instinctively, if the bad guy's not fighting them, Blade would always hang on. He would hang on. He would yank them out from underneath a deck or wherever they're hiding. He'd pull them out. He would hang on, unless they tried to come at him and grab his collar or strike him in some way. I've seen it happen where he would just switch to the other arm because they were coming at him with the other arm. And it was a beautiful thing to watch, man. I mean, like, just beautiful. I had a guy, tracked a guy to a garage. I made there's a lot of mistakes I've made, believe me, that in hindsight, but I tracked a guy to a garage. I pulled the dog off him too soon. It was like a 45-minute track. Pulled the dog off him too soon because I saw he didn't have any weapons on him. He had no shirt on, but he was high on crack. And I had left my dog's tracking line on him, and we were in a garage full of rubble. I'm like, all right, you're going to walk out of the garage the same way you walked in here. And of course, he's high on crack. What does he do? He runs out the garage, slams the door, and Blade's caught. He's caught on his tracking leash. So I said, all right, screw it. I cut him loose. I took the tracking lead off him, and I look down the alley about 100 yards. I see this dude running like Devin Hester down the alley and Blade behind him, and they both disappeared. So I'm running. I'm yelling Blade's name. By the time I found him, I see them fighting in a driveway. Like, he's fighting my dog. Like, he's high, he's on something. And Blade is just shooting in and out, shooting in and out on him, just picking him apart. I don't want my dog biting and holding in that situation. This guy's trying to hit him, choke him. Blade picked him apart. And by the time I got to him and he saw me, he turned and tried to run one more time. And that's when Blade ran, grabbed him by the crotch. And I'm like, all right, we're not taking the dog off you until you're cuffed this time. So I cuffed him up. Then I pulled the dog off. And then I had no idea where I was. So we have Shot Spotter and Gary, so it can detect shots where you're at. So I just started firing into the ground, and then that's how the cops found me. But getting off topic, the subject of bite and hold and how the dogs fight instinctively. They will hold instinctively. They will. But they'll also let go and hammer you someplace else instinctively too. You just have to allow it. You got to breed the right dog with the right instincts, which is what Josh is doing. The genetics and instincts have a lot to do with it. So there's just reason after reason after reason that I'll never go back, or that I'll always maintain this relationship with them, because that's where I want my dogs from. The administration is on board with it too. We've got we've got 5 or 6 dogs right now working on the PD from Canada, and we've got other guys in the area, in the county. So Josh, you probably got 10 or 12, maybe more dogs.
Yeah, easy. We got some texts last night. One of the boys, I won't say who, but they started rolling in. I think around you might have heard it already, but they started sending in some information that somebody was trying to fight the PD last night. One of the dogs had some fun, so he decided not to fight the police anymore.
Oh, that was Jeff's dog Hammered.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you already know that.
For us, yeah.
Hey guys, I just want to touch on some of the stuff you've been saying. This is all great conversation. Going back to what Yoda was saying in regards to the training piece, proper application, IPSC shooters versus your real life application. The one thing that I know for certain, just in general from human performance, is in order to be effective in whatever it is I'm doing, whether it's a presentation, it's a speech I have to do for school, whatever the viewer is doing, I can relate to this. Two things are critical. The first one is preparation. And the second one, which I don't think that you could pay enough for, is confidence. And what I want to ask Chris, going from one dog to a new dog, and I can hear in your voice the change that has made in your life. How much of that comes down to confidence, knowing that when you're in and putting hands on a perp that you're not going to get bit by your own dog? How big does that confidence piece play in application in your day-to-day life with your canine?
It's enormous because, and I can tell you, I felt even more so being younger, when I was a little bit younger and less injured and had Blade fully trained, that I felt absolutely indestructible with that dog by my side. I knew, and first of all, I'm confident in my ability to fight, but I knew that if I was losing a fight, that dog was coming. You know what I mean? And Josh's father said this last time I was out there, is that when you have that dog sitting by your side, that's a lot of power. That's a lot of power to have.
What's your thoughts on those people in the underworld? A lot of them are smart, great leadership. Some of them have great leadership capabilities. I mean, obviously they'd have to, because look how much money, time, and effort we gotta, has to go into training a guy like you to deal with them. So it's not that they're not smart. But for those, what's your word of advice, if you have any, for those that might be in the underworld, might be watching this show, and they have second thoughts about that lifestyle? Maybe they have thoughts they'd like to get out. They'd like to change their life.
Yeah, I mean, I see it a lot, and I'll ask these guys, even when I worked in the jail, I'll ask them, what are you doing in here, man? You're way too smart to have your life wasted sitting in here, or, I'll give you a good example on a traffic stop. Just a couple weeks ago, I got this kid who is rolling with an AR. He's got bullet holes all in his car, but his arm is in like a brace or a sling. And I'm like, how did you do that? And he said, I did it in football. He told me he was, a football player at this Division I college in Tennessee. And I'm like, well, what are you out here doing this for? My advice is use your skills. I grew up poor, and it didn't stop me. There's so many resources out there for poor kids, poor teenagers. Money is not the issue. Do something with your skills, and I've tried to tell them this, all you can do is give them the advice. Use your skills to do something good in life. Honestly, you like shooting, the military's got a place for you, and like I said, money is not an issue when it comes to college. These kids can all find the resources to do it. I would say use your skills and use your athletic ability to do something good, because a lot of them are turning it and using it to do something bad. You've got good grasp on how to deal with money. Don't use that knowledge on dealing drugs and financing your drug operation. Do it the right way, because you're going to get caught. You'll get caught. simply just gonna get caught. You know, I think they think it's worth it in the short run, but it's just not. And the talent and personalities of these guys is fantastic. If you sit there and have a conversation with these guys, you think, you know, they're hardened criminals, but they're really actually just poor kids trying to make money. And then they're killing each other on top of it, trying to compete with each other. So, and then, you know, you got some of them who are willing to try to kill us. It's just,
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? I love the conversation because, you know, we talk a lot about the struggles and some of the challenges. But Chris, what have been some of the most rewarding parts of your job, kind of reflecting back on your career?
you know, I know that this might sound bad to you guys, but like the rewarding things to me is when I can, and this happened when I get called by a Gary policeman to track a guy who just raped a woman, and I track him and I find him, and the dog hands his rear end to him. You know, like that's rewarding to me. And don't get me wrong, it does feel rewarding when I see some of the guys that I spoke with every day. I worked in the jail for 3 years, and some of these guys were in there for the long haul, like, but they were like really cool guys. Like I would talk to them every day, and when I see those guys back out on the street someday, and they like actually come up to me and say, "Hey, man, I'm glad you treated me with respect, and it's good to see you again, and now I'm doing good." And that's happened. You know, I've seen some guys come off of heroin and you know, heavy drug use and come back to me later and say, "Yeah, I'm good now," and that's pretty cool. But I really like seeing the poor kid, you know, the kids in the poor neighborhoods come back later and say, "Hey, yeah, I'm a cop now." You know, that's awesome. Or I really like hearing, you know, the younger teenage kids say, "Hey, I want to be a cop." Or, you know, these young 20-year-old guys saying, "I want to be a cop," and they're going against everything that their neighborhood is telling them to do, like, "Oh, the police are evil and this and that." But they're coming to me saying, "I want to be the police." You know, that's pretty cool. But really the most rewarding thing to me, I like all the heartfelt stuff, but the most rewarding thing to me is hammering bad guys with this dog.
Hey, Chris, listen, dude. That was well said. And I'm hoisting in what you're saying, and I understand it. And you know, let's face it. If you're on the street and you actually you don't find a level of enjoying in those conflicts, then I would say you're in the wrong line of work. I mean,
Right.
It's like soldiers, most soldiers enjoy a good fight, like, and they
Yeah.
should, like,
Oh, yeah.
and if you're winning, it's great. I mean, if you're in a hard fight and you're winning, I mean, that's fantastic. And if you're in a hard fight and you're losing, then, you know, guys like, you learn from that to improve on the next fight so you don't lose. But I really appreciate that. That was very candid and straightforward and honest. So thanks, man.
Chris is touching on some stuff, you know, when you talk about guys and gals getting involved in law enforcement, and then witnessing and experiencing what these guys and gals are dealing with for our safety and our security. You know, that's why we're here. We're here to help, and we're here to bring clarity and bring hope for you know, for people that are at home dealing with stress and dealing with some obstacles in their lives, and listening to encouraging and courageous. You know, Chris isn't going to call himself courageous, but what he did was an act of courage, and what the dog did beside him was an act of courage, in my opinion. Chris, I don't know what your charity is. Is it a charity, Lake County?
Lake County
donate
Canine Association.
Can they donate to that?
Yeah, sure, they can. Our sheriff is pretty supportive of you know, taking care of most of what we need, but we do use that money for equipment and bite suits, and probably gonna buy another dog pretty soon out of that fund. So, but yeah, they can donate to it. all the information is on the Facebook page, Lake County Canine Association on Facebook.
Okay, cool.
Awesome,
Cool,
Chris.
man.
Well, thank you for taking the time with us. I mean, your time is valuable, and we truly do appreciate it. And
Yeah, anytime.
sharing your story. And hey, we look forward to maybe having you back in the near future if you're available.
Yeah, sure. Just let me know. I'll make the time. All right, Kevin. Good seeing you.
Okay, brother. I'll talk to you.
Thanks.
Be safe. I'll give you a
All
show.
right, you too.
Chris.
Thanks.
Later.
All right.
This has been your Sunday service.